Okay guys, we're going to review the formal science lab report. We're going to go over what the introduction entails to remind you. We're going to review what materials and methods and how to write that up to remind you, and then we're going to discuss how you put your results and discussion into your lab report after you complete the experiment. So to start off, you see we have the formal science lab report. Okay, so the title, always, any science lab report you're going to do this year will be the effect of insert the independent variable on insert the dependent variable. So you don't need to keep in mind, if you work with an organism, you need to include its common and scientific name, which Miss Mack or myself will let you know. And the reason we like this particular title is because it allows, it allows for us to know exactly what the experiment is about. Okay, so the introduction, this should be a review. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. Basically, you're going to give basic pertinent information about your topic, explain what is known about it already. You're going to explain the scientific problem that the lab is investigating. You need to avoid personal pronouns, and I list a couple there. You need to include your hypotheses without saying my hypothesis is, and that hypothesis needs to be in the last sentence. Nowhere else. The absolute last sentence of the introduction. If this, then that, because yada 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 yada. So you want to make sure you organize your sentences and use proper grammar and punctuation. And a great way to do this would be to write your introduction and then put it away and then go back and proof it. Proof it. Have your parents, have a dorm parent, have a friend, anybody, have somebody go over it for you. Make sure you use parenthetical citations, and you're going to write as if you have not performed the experiment yet. And the last thing here is make sure your quotes link to your hypothesis and that your analysis links to your quote. Again, feel free to go back and use the quote selection and analysis workshop that we did previously on any of your drafts. It's only going to help you. And with the introduction, remember we had that you want to keep it that upside down triangle with our very basic and broad information science knowledge, and then we're going to go to some type of an experiment that's already been ran and the purpose of your experiment, and then last but not least you're going to go to the hypothesis, which is right at the tail end. Make sure your introduction is, as I've called it, an upside down triangle. So on to materials and methods. You guys did have a crack at this earlier in the term, so we're going to review that because a lot of your materials and methods lacked reasoning, I guess we're going to say. So a couple of things. First, you're going to write in the past tense as though the experiment has already been done. Make sure you're in past tense. You need to avoid personal pronouns. I did this, then we did this, and then Miss Quist did this, and Miss Mack got me this. It doesn't matter. That's not how you write a materials and methods. Avoid personal pronouns. You're not going to list materials, even in paragraph form. Just mention them as you're writing or explaining your procedure. 4 canisters were used, as you'll see in the example below. Describe the method you're using in enough detail so that the reader understands exactly what's going on. But you don't need to be specific about measurements. In terms of the materials and methods you're writing up tonight, you can just write a spoonful of applesauce. You don't have to say specifically how many grams were on the spoon. So you want to be brief but complete. Make sure you mention the number of trials you repeated. For this specific experiment, you're going to only be using 2, and that's a little odd. That's a little different. Normally we use 3, but just given the amount of time we have in class, 2 will be sufficient. You want to make sure the variables, clear what the variables dependent and independent are. You don't need to say the independent variable is this, the dependent variable is this. You can simply say something like the sense of smell was changed numerous times by X, Y, and Z, or you measured, X, Y, and Z. Obviously, the one you measured is the dependent, and the one you're changing is the independent. You guys know what these variables are, so now it's time to write and prove to us that you know what they are. So here's an example of a good materials and methods. You guys have seen this, or should have seen this. Note how there's no personal pronouns. Okay, see how they wrote that? I'm going to let you guys read that. Why don't you pause the video, read over that materials and methods real quick, and then when you're done reading it, just click play. Okay, so this is good because it's written in past tense. It has enough detail so somebody could repeat the lab. It mentions the independent variable and the dependent variable and what was held constant. And it clearly mentions the number of trials that were carried out. And it's also good because there's more than one paragraph. Typically the procedure is gonna happen up here. Is where the procedure is going to be, and then down here is where you're going to talk about how many times it was repeated, your variables, the number of trials, and all that jazz. So that's your materials and methods. If you have questions, you need to be in contact with your teacher. Okay, the results. Now this is going to be new. You should be including a table, diagram, or graph for this particular lab that we're dealing where we're eating stuff. You're just going to be including a table. You're not actually going to be graphing anything. However, as mentioned before, you need to make sure that your table or graph or whatever you put in is titled. Okay, you guys know this. You had a quiz on it already. Label everything, include units, include a description of major trends in the graph. Again, you're not using a graph in this particular experiment, but that's okay. So here's an example of a result. And I chose to use this one because it shows us not only the actual numbers here, but it gives us the observations, which is basically what you guys are going to be using. Obviously your table will have borders and will look a lot neater than here. Fortunately, a smartboard only allows me to do so many things. So here's the results, and there's my table title. Make sure you put a table title in your results, and then this is about as big as your results section is. It's just a little blurb. It's an overview. Again, you can pause the video, read it, and then come back when you're ready. These are good results because they show the averages of data, they show the titles are labeled, they include all units, there's a description of the data included. You're going to tell me what you see, what happened. Keep in mind you don't mention the name of the person in your experiment. You can refer to them as subject 1. Okay, the last thing and not least is we're going to discuss the discussion. So here's where you're going to explain your results completely using your data. You're going to relate your findings back to your hypothesis. You're going to mention any errors that you found. So you're going to mention errors or sources of errors. Where could things have messed up? Whether you messed them up or the environmental conditions messed you up. And you want to describe future recommendations. If somebody was to run this lab again, what would you say to them? What would you say? Hey, do this. This will work out a little bit better. You're also going to want to discuss the real-world applications for your results. And the last part, but not least, is the literature cited. So this is where that works cited sheet from your introduction is going to go. Keep in mind it's MLA citations. And make sure you cite either if you're paraphrasing or your direct quotes, because if you do not cite them, they will be considered plagiarism. We've gone over this numerous times. So that's the lab report. I believe for homework you guys are going to be writing the materials and methods and the results, possibly the discussion, depending on how far we get in class. If you have any questions, shoot your teacher an email. Other than that, have a great day, and I will see you later.